Howdy, I'm Paul Isagoder, and this is Author's Dozen, a podcast where I explore barriers to storytelling by writing one novel every month for 12 months. Please enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Author's Dozen podcast. It's been a while, hasn't it? And yes, I know it's been terrible for you. It's been wonderful for me. Free time. It's all wonderful. I want to welcome you back because I also want to welcome back Amy, who was on our podcast before. She did an interview where I read her amazing and polished book, and now she's back to read my not amazing and not polished book. There's a level of embarrassment, that comes with sending your work off if you know it's not 100% yet. And yeah, that was definitely magnified by the wonderful regard with which I hold Amy's latest book. So, yeah, Amy, would you like to remind the people who you are and what you do and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. My name is Amy Lynn Green, and I am the author of a debut historical novel called Things We Didn't Say, and that's what we talked about last time. I also work in the publishing industry on the marketing side of things, so that's more my background. Occasionally I do critiques and readings for our editorial side, but for the most part I'm on the dark side of the publishing house, and also have a number of writing friends who we get together and exchange parts of manuscripts and critique. So that's my background. Usually some of my friends that I critique with are more on the fantasy range of things, but my personal reading style goes from historical to fantasy to kids' books to nonfiction and almost everything in between, although not a lot of sci-fi. So that's the grain of salt that you can take this with, is sometimes if I say something, it might just be that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Grains of salt will be liberally applied to all these interviews because I am hopefully forgiving of whatever it is you're afraid of me being angry at. I hope you will be forgiving for a book that is well, I'll let you figure it out, but yes. It's not what I would produce if I had years to work on it. So yeah. We will leave it at that.
This is like 10,000 times better than my first drafts are. So I don't know why you're worried about any of this because, yes, there are some places where you can go through and say like, oh yeah, I would take more time on this, or I've developed this particular thing. But yes, I was very impressed, especially knowing in how little time you wrote it in. But even if I hadn't known that, it's a really solid first draft.
Well, thank you very much. And so we can get started. So like with all of our critiques, I'm just here to listen and have a conversation. So you can just start it however you like.
Great. So I am reading and reviewing the SS Terminus. And again, not usually my genre, but there was a historical element that made Paul say, ooh, maybe this is the one that would be good for you to read. So we've got some steampunk elements going on in this one, which I really enjoyed. So before I start in on things that I liked and things that if I were your editor, I would tell you that you could go through and work on in your next draft, I just wanted to ask you a question first, Paul, which is if you were describing the plot of this, like thinking about how to describe it on the back cover of a book, but you also weren't worried about spoiling the ending too much, so it doesn't have to be catchy or hooky, but if you were thinking about in a few paragraphs how you would tell the plot of the story, let me know. And while you think about that, the reason that I ask that question is because before I do a critique, I like to hear what's most important about the story to the author so that I know, first of all, if it came through to me that that was the main plot and what things were subplots. And also just as I make suggestions to know that that's the main thing that you want to keep as the through line can be super helpful. So tell me, what is the plot of the SS Terminus?
Sure. So I'll tell you what, that is terrifying because what I would prefer is if people would just remain in ignorance and think like, oh, whatever I got out of it was what he meant to me get out of it, whatever. So, but yes, this is helpful. So let me go ahead and get started. So SS Terminus is about a sort of 17th century naval officer who gets an assignment to go and chase down a former friend of his who is also a captain. he is promoted to captain for this mission because it's like a secret dirty mission, because this other guy was sort of going rogue and pursuing this like spaceship that has just recently come into this otherwise, regular 17th century-ish world. Everybody's freaked out about the spaceship. Everybody thinks the spaceship can wipe everybody out, and so they're just trying to stay away. As kind of like the British, or French colonial stand-in, this captain's empire sends him out to sort of stop the guy from blowing everything up, or there's some other people with some competing interests along the way. That all comes to a head as he tries to manage things between his crew and some like a doctor. It's his second mate, his first mate. He's eventually marooned at sea with a bunch of sick guys, and he's picked up by the spaceship, who it turns out is captained by his former friend, who also lost his ship and crew, but who wants to use this spaceship as a way of just protecting the only people left who originally had the spaceship, which are some children who otherwise would have died from a disease that the Empire sort of like sent after them. So it's
Yeah, that was great. Good job with like zero preparation that I just threw that at you. And that's helpful to me. And I think that, yes, that is the main arc that I got. There are some questions that I'm going to ask to say, how do you feel like this serves the main plot? Or is there any way some things could be combined or changed in a way that would make it clearer what the main thing that's going on would be? So, great.
Sure.
Wonderful. So some things that I really liked. I'm going to start out with this. There were a lot of things. The things that I didn't like are usually a little bit more specific. And so I go into a little bit more detail on those. And the things that I liked were broader, which is good because it's really hard to fix a lot of broad things.
right.
I really liked how well the novel read. And I think that one thing that was good about that is the short amount of time you decided to go for in the course of the story, leaving a lot of the backstory to memories or some brief dialogue bits worked well. The tension of the story was able to be kept up because it's only over the course of a few weeks. And I think that was perfect for what you were trying to do. I also thought that the peril of the actual situation they were in balanced really well with some of the interior conflict that the characters were having. There wasn't, I felt like, too much of one or the other. Every now and then there was a place where I thought, maybe there could be a little less of something, or this was a little too on the nose, but for the most part, a really good balance. And very hard to do, I feel like, in the sense that a lot of books I read, the middle, just like nothing's happening. We're just like biding time until the end of the story. And I really didn't feel like that with this one, which was great. Did you have the middle planned out as you were going through, or did you just kind of know where you wanted to start and where you wanted to end?
Yeah, so a little bit of columns A and B. So I wanted the idea to center around like disease and, kind of the only weapon you would use against a colonizer or a colonizee is, a biological one, since the technology is so unbalanced. I originally did not foresee the sort of mutiny angle that became apparent later on as like the more interesting way to approach conflict, because a fight between a ship and a spaceship is not something I could write about and retain any sense of realism. Yeah, it became more about like mutiny, and as that happened, it became more about like power dynamics and just the moral compromises you have to make sometimes in leadership roles. I don't know. I like intrigue. I like trying to play games with people's heads. So it's a good time.
Yep,
I don't know what
that's
that
great.
says about me as a person, but there we are.
I mean, it says you're a writer. That I think is a pretty universal trait. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there are some perfectly normal writers who are not sadistic,
Yep.
but we're not either of them. So, other things that I really liked. I think Robert as a character is really, you want to cheer for him the whole time. His upbringing, his the way he goes about his life and his actions, and I just think it's really easy to sympathize with him from the very first chapter, which is really important, especially because a lot of the story is just like it's told from his point of view. So I think that that's a really great lead casting that you did in that character. I have a little bit more to say about that because there were a few places where I was like, I don't know if this is super consistent with who you are.
Yes.
So we'll talk.
Yep.
But really great character, which I read books for the characters, so that is important to making the book hold together. Last thing, on the things that I wanted to call out specifically, I really liked how the sci-fi elements worked inside your 1600s world, that you had both the maritime drama and the struggles that are inherent with that, alongside more Star Trek-like conflicts about like what do we do when another civilization collides with ours, and the idea of empire is kind of inherent in both of them. So I think it was a really good pairing, and that those two themes played a lot better together than I even would have guessed. I like that the characters had to worry about being attacked by a spaceship and also by like a whale, and they had to be in fear of being marooned and also provoking interplanetary war. The variety of the conflict there, I feel like, was good without being too like they fit well thematically, even though the two things were very different, which is great.
Oh no, that was a fear of mine, as like I kept trying to like drum up conflict, is like, does this all work together thematically? And I think it's like, it's sort of cheating because again, like when your theme is power, like everything can relate to it in some form. So yeah, I guess I'm just a cheater. So there we are.
Sometimes that works. I wouldn't call it cheating. I would call it being intentional in the selection of your theme. That sounds way more snobbish and official.
And charitable. So thank you very much. Yes.
No problem.
All right.
Yeah. So a lot of these areas that I would say like this would be what you would do if you go back in revisions are also things that relate to strengths that'll come up as I talk about them. But these are the things that I feel like I would probably change. Or advise you to change. And every now and then I'm going to say one where I'm like, this could just be me. Like somebody else could completely disagree with this. And some of them I'm like, nah, I feel like I have a stronger instinct on this one, which is how I usually distinguish. So Robert and his consistency in his actions. So you're playing with the theme of power and how it influences someone, especially someone who grew up very powerless and then has come into a position of power. I think that's great. I think there were a lot of times where that really worked well and I could feel the struggle. And then there were some times where I was like, where did that come from? Who are you, Robert? So let's see. I wrote down a few examples of like, okay, so he sends Sydney on an important mission to stow away this trunk and then apologizes to him for doing that because it would seem like he was disrespecting him. So he's just taking very good care with that relationship to make sure, like, I just wanted you to let you know, like, you were important. But then later he finds out that the doctor didn't tell him something that his authority told the doctor not to pass on to Robert, and he just like kicks him in the groin and watches him vomit, which feels like disproportionate. And also when I read it, I was like, I don't like this guy anymore.
Right.
That was, and I think I know why you did that, because you were needing to hint at other things later. But you should not sacrifice what the character would actually do, because as I read it I was like, this is fine. Paul's gonna change this because there's no way the character would have actually done that.
Right.
Things, and some of them are easier to fix. Like for example, he punishes the boy on the ship who lost the evaporator which to me, the boy was just literally going to get more water to fill up the evaporator, which is what he was told to do. So he was being punished for doing and because Robert is so big on like following orders and like, it didn't make sense to me that he would be like, yeah, punish you, kid. Whereas if, for example, you changed it and the kid like fell asleep and like was slacking off, then it would make total sense that he would do that. So I think what I tend to do sometimes when I do revisions is I take every character and I just read through their dialogue and their actions one at a time. Not for like super minor characters, but for any that I would consider either main or secondary, and say like, does this match? And does this person have unique vocabulary and a unique set of quirks and gestures that go along with them? And if they don't, either if it's something that contradicts something they've already done, or if they share too much in common with another character where it's hard to distinguish them, then you can make those changes at that point. And I personally feel like it's really hard to do until you've written the whole thing, because you don't necessarily know what is my character's moral code, what would they do and not do until you're done with it. And then you're like, okay, now that I have it, I can apply it consistently to all of the things that the character does. So
yeah, you can smooth over their strange bumps of character. Yes.
And it's also completely fine for someone to do something out of character. So, for example, I had noted that at one point when they go into town, Lee, one of the other officers, is just super harsh to one of the informants and then said, like, I just felt like it. Yeah. And that's could be fine if like it comes into play later that he's like super racist against a particular group of people, and that becomes part of his character as opposed to just something that happens once. It's a lot harder to do that with secondary characters because they're not as involved in the plot. So if it's something like that and you can't find a way to work it in, I'd suggest just changing it so it's something a little bit more normal. The other thing with character consistency to watch for, I would say, as you do another read-through, is there were several times where you told us what a character was like, and I was like, really? Like, I didn't realize, like, one big one for me was at the end when you were talking about the children. You said Ajax, the main leader kid, had a real attitude, and all of the kids were acting like little lordlings. And I don't think I really got that from their interactions. And that's kind of important to how Robert feels about them. So I don't know in this case if I'd suggest amping that up, because I don't know if that's, like, if they were too over the top, I don't know if I would believe that. So unless, and maybe you can, maybe there's something in their culture that would make that make sense. But
yeah, no, I get that. I think it's interesting because I think I need to be more precise with my language, you know, with those sorts of things. So I was thinking more along the lines of like, when I'd say like little lordlings, I'm not thinking of like, do what I say. I'm thinking of like, you know, having, you know, all the luxuries of life and not really, you know, being able to take care of oneself or, you know, things like that. So but I think being more precise with that is the author's job. So there we go.
Great. Yep. So I think there are some characters that are pretty consistent. And I think Erica is one of those where you kind of know what she's about all the time, and she has a very distinct way of speaking and a sense of humor. And I appreciated seeing that throughout. There were several other ones as well, but I just remembered her. Also, I feel like Dr. Shaw could be more snobby throughout. Because she ends up only being snobby in the beginning, and I liked that. Like, I liked the contrast with all of the other characters, and it made the Doctor stand out from the others. And then I think as the plot moved on and more things were happening, that edge to that character was sort of lost, but could still be fun to play with. Because who doesn't love snobby characters on a boat?
I think that's a great point. I think that I was sort of like envisioning someone like softening up, you know, to people that they didn't know before. But in the beginning it was like very hardcore, like, oh, you're just a lieutenant. So And
that may be what you end up doing. I feel like, though, because initial cowardice and the "this is not my usual lifestyle" thing was played up a lot. That could continue even if you don't make all of the Doctor's exchanges really rude and demeaning. Like,
Yes,
that's
yes.
not a thing you need to do, but it could be fun to play with that.
Right. Yes. No, that's
Cool.
a very good point.
This is the category that I feel like my lack of sci-fi and general maritime knowledge might come into, as far as there are other people who could be completely clear on these things. So there were a few points and like major plot points where I was like, I am really not sure what's happening and why right now. And again, that could be because I don't understand chain of command things, or that I missed some foreshadowing because I'm not used to genre conventions. So if you hear that from other people, it's probably good to take to heart. And if you don't, you can just assume that I missed something. But I do think that some of the motivations and stakes of different parts of the story could probably be clarified, even if other people did end up figuring out what was going on. But that said, I really appreciated the fact that you didn't over-explain things and have like, and now this is exactly why I'm going to do this thing. So it's a delicate balance. And there were a lot of times when I was like, oh, fun. Like, I got to figure this out as the reader, what was happening. But I think especially the bigger plot points, which I can name a few of them, that weren't super clear to me, would be better for me to be told a few more things than I was told as a reader. At one point, this is a smaller one, but Robert said that the crew of the Constant knows Dawn as well as any ship knows its captain. And I was really unclear. Like, I understood Dawn's relationship to Robert, but had the Constant been captained by Robert as opposed to Beale? Because they all seemed to that seemed important to them, because they were making assumptions about what Dawn did based on their knowledge of him. And yet I didn't realize that that was the case, or how that could be possible given the working of the situation.
Yeah. I'll chalk one of those up to just, having to write in a month. And, I think that I imagined like the Constant being a more constant presence in the book at the beginning. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And again, that one's very easy to fix because they could have heard rumors about Dawn without actually being his crew, and that would be just as good for what you need it for plot-wise.
And Dawn is definitely like a character who has like a certain he's kind of the like Wonder Boy, the way everybody talks about him. Yeah, I think you could make assumptions about him through that, but not necessarily about his crew.
Yeah, and I think you could also play that up more, like the fact that there are stories, maybe even some like idioms or phrases that people will refer to, just like everybody knows these stories about Dawn, which could also have some like fun comedic moments in there as well.
Right.
I'm just assuming the type of things he would be up to would end up being funny. One other one, and again, this would be pretty easy to clarify, is they got this sealed letter that they weren't supposed to open until a certain time, and then they opened it, and everyone reacted. And I didn't understand their reactions or what the letter said. I think I might have had a guess at the end, but I was not clear on what the characters' reactions to that were, and I think that was because I wasn't clear, even from the beginning, of what the Admiral was accusing Dawn of. It was a little vague because they weren't sure.
Yeah.
But because of that, I couldn't interpret the letter that he sent and why everybody was so upset about it.
Yeah. So I think I tried to sort of explain in the dialogue, like when everyone was like upset, but it's basically a letter that like authorizes whoever holds the letter to like hunt this guy down. And they were supposed to give it to like some disreputable characters. And so, just basically allowing a pirate to like hunt down, someone from the Navy is verboten in these guys' minds because they're in the Navy, and it creates a really bad precedent and all these things. So, yeah, I think I definitely could have made that clearer. I think just maybe even giving the text of like what's on the letter could definitely clear things up. So I'm all about clarity, and I don't want anybody to come to this and be like, oh, that's like I must be like genre savvy to understand even what's going on. That cannot be.
Well, the good news was that was what I thought was probably, like, based on my reading of it. I think I just, I was not clear from the beginning that the Admiral was pretty sure Don was up to no good, because they discussed maybe he's insane. Maybe he's leaving us a coded message that would help us. And while I think it's okay for Robert to entertain those different theories, I think with that letter, we just need to know the Admiral thinks he's up to no good. And that might actually be useful, because then if the Admiral is saying, Don is up to no good, and you're going to go after him and investigate, and then Robert's like, I don't really know if he's up to no good, that provides an interesting contrast there as well. So, and I think that would make more sense.
Cool.
Great. And then the last one, I was a little unclear about what Robert and his makeshift crew's plan was in what they were doing to Dawn at the end. And I felt like some of it was deception that Dawn was in on, and some of it wasn't. And I had no idea how to sort out the two of those in the end. And I think that was what was leading to my general confusion with that. So if you have any insights on that, I know deception is the hardest to do, because you don't want to telegraph to the readers that not everything is as it seems until it's over. But I don't know if I ever got the clarity of what was as it seemed to be. Who were they lying to? Who were they telling the truth to?
So part of the difficulty with the end is to like sort of get away with protecting the children, but also like taking the threat off the table. Robert pretty much has to lie to everybody. He tells one story to Erica. He tells one story to the rest of the crew of the Terminus, and he tells one story to the kids, and it's all a big spiderweb of intrigue, which, in the time that I had, that is not an excuse, I understand, but in the time that I had, there was a level of just like, can't get into it right now, let's just see this play out.
And again, that's a perfectly good excuse. If you decide to go through rewrites on it, you would just need to say, okay, I need to figure out how to communicate to the reader what is the actual plan. And I think the main thing you would need to decide is, do you need to reveal it to the reader before it happens so they can understand the lies that he's saying, or do you want to keep it a surprise and explain it afterward? And you would need a way to do that in either case, whether it's somebody who he trusts, who he reveals the plan to either before or after, or some sort of construct that would allow you to give a lot of information that's fairly complex without it being just like, and now let me reveal my plan, because, not ideal. Right.
Yeah, no, I get that. And like, I've always been more partial to the Lies of Locke Lamora or the Ocean's 11 sort of reveal, where it's like, oh, the plan you thought was being planned is actually, and then you get to see it all play out. And it's again, yes, it is tough to pull off. And this is something else I was sort of thinking about when you were talking about like character consistency, is just like, I was trying to inhabit the mind of someone who is very different from me. So someone who is very comfortable laying down the law with like pretty extreme punishment, and just a culture that is more at home with the idea of like suffering and pain as like a tool. And so it's, again, we all do inhabit different kinds of people to write these things, but at the same time, like, it always bugs me when you are reading a book like Game of Thrones or something, and you're expecting like everyone in it to be like a feminist, or like it's like all these like sort of cultural things. I mean, in the first couple chapters of that book, like, you see the character that everybody loves like cut off a deserter's head, and it's it's just normal. Like, that's how justice is done, and it's not like condoning it, but it's also like trying to get in the head of a culture that does. So Yeah,
Yes.
that was the biggest problem I came across with the characters, and why I wanted someone, interested in history and historical fiction to approach it.
Yeah, and I think that when I say character consistency, I don't think you need to go back and make Robert complete pacifist who's just
Hmm.
trying to win the crew over by being a good person.
Yep.
So I think it's more making the reactions at the same level as would they would warrant, and making sure that the characters who do the things that get punishments actually deserve those punishments. And I think that
Mm.
that can work really well. And
Yeah.
also with the whole intrigue ending, I definitely think you could probably pull it off where you explain it later and it becomes clear what the real plan was to people, because you do hint in his conversation with Dawn that he's going to be doing something schemy. So
Hmm.
the readers can be prepared to be like, yeah, I don't know how much of this, like that's what I was thinking. I'm not sure how much of this is the actual plan here. As long as at some point it does become clear to the reader of like, here's what the goal is, and this is why he had to do all of this scheming to get to that goal, which is
Right.
hard. And I don't know. I was trying to think of practical things I could tell you for like places where that would be helpful, or like places I was specifically confused, and I was like, I don't know, man. So I I feel like that's something where you just make choices as an author because you know what direction you want to go in.
Sure.
But I'm sure you can do that well. So you have my
Well, I'll
confidence,
give it a
if not
try.
my advice. So great. And then another thing was, I thought there was some foreshadowing in the story that I think worked really well, and some of it that I feel like you could strengthen by making
Mm.
some changes earlier on in the story. So the ones that I feel like you could maybe change a little bit is, on the one side, I feel like the Dr. Shaw identity thing was maybe a little bit too obvious early on.
Mm.
Maybe that's just because I'm a woman and I noticed that you were pointing out specific things, and I was like, why would Paul be calling attention to this? Aha, I bet
Mm.
she's a woman. Oh, I forgot to say spoilers. Spoilers!
Yeah, I don't think it's just that you're a woman that,
Yes.
you came up with that. There's I gave at least like three big
Mm-hmm.
sort of hints that I always highlighted with the word strange. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think, again, in a book this small and with this many things going on, I just
Mm-hmm.
made it pretty obvious. But yeah, I could definitely tamp down on that.
And I mean, I think that especially the one of Dr. Shaw wanting privacy often and not being around the others could be associated more with the general snobbery. Um,
Hmm.
and that can
It's a
kind
good
of
idea.
give a reason for it. And I also don't think this one needs to be foreshadowed a ton, because it's not a reveal that the plot depends upon. Like, it's not the big
Right.
final reveal at the end. And
Yeah.
so if you have just a few things, like even the fact that the doctor really didn't want to come on board the ship, and
Hmm.
was really hesitant about that, and if also that added like sense of privacy, I feel like that might be enough to make that reveal feel worthwhile.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that was
No, I get
one.
it.
I think on the other side of things, the Sydney's betrayal, I feel like that I really liked it. I feel like the mutiny worked well in the plot. I liked the little group of outcasts who were shoved off on a raft. I thought that was really fun and a fun plot twist, and also a fun way of narrowing down the cast of the story so that we could get to
Right.
know a few people better, which was great. Um, the first few chapters, Sydney was very much like the rival to Robert, and like you
Hmm.
talked about him as like, yeah, that spoiled guy who really doesn't want me to be captain. But then all
Hmm.
of their exchanges were super cordial and even positive. Even and like then they made peace with each other, and I was like, what, in chapter 13, like you don't have anything to make peace for. Like you guys have been like strategizing and like
Hmm.
complimenting each other's great ideas. And I at the time I was like, something really weird is going on in their dynamics.
Yeah.
And um so I don't know what I would advise with that, whether I would say like do more with the antagonism until they have some sort of like crisis moment where they have to work together and then things are better until they're not, or if he's just never antagonistic toward Robert, or if I'm not sure which one would have the best impact to make the betrayal seem more like which one would kind of heighten the payoff of that foreshadowing.
Right.
So,
and that's the tough thing with like, that's the tough thing with like betrayals is that the character is actively trying not to be found out, you know? And so like, how do you give away through like hints that the character lets slip, you know, that like he really sees himself as above this guy, or you know, is just trying to lay low. Yeah, I think again, just making Sydney more consistent as a character, and like again, a little bit more snobbish and rough. You know, I don't know. I like it when people get along, I guess, and that's like that is tough for character conflict, because I can kind of see everybody's point with like where they're coming from, and it's a very, I need to be less understanding. I need to get a little bit more hatred.
I mean,
no, I'm messing around.
Yeah, I know you are, but I also felt like there were some times when I was like, you know, I kind of like that this isn't the typical antagonistic, like this rich guy resents this poor guy dynamic between them, but then it still was. It just was undercover. So like maybe even just strengthening the like why he mutinied and like making it clear to the readers that he sees himself like I did get this, but maybe even more clearly, because all we're seeing is what Robert is trying to do to save everyone. And he's just trying to do the best he can in a very difficult situation. And then Sydney, it's hard for us to see that Sydney also feels like he's saving everyone by doing this. And I don't think I quite picked up on I didn't really sympathize with Sydney at all in the end. It was like, okay, you just are doing this because you don't like this poor kid who became captain, which I know there was more to it than that. Like he really feels like he is saving the day. And again, that could be part of the like not understanding the letter and what it involved, and maybe using that as like Sydney really doesn't like the orders they receive, like just setting up other things where it's like throughout there's some opposition between the two of them, but it's not necessarily a personal opposition. It's an idealistic opposition that then plays out in a mutiny scenario. So. Yeah.
And I think so. Yeah, that is totally, I think that the like personal dislike of one another is definitely, you know, makes the mutiny more plausible. But one thing that I was a little bit disappointed about, you know, reading back through my book is the sort of like the reason behind, you know, why everybody wants this thing, this spaceship, and like why some people would want to bury it because like they just want the world to not explode, and other people who like want to get it because it'll like let them project power. I sort of pictured in the back of my mind, you know, like a constitutional monarchy that wants to become an absolute monarchy. And like Sydney is like, yeah, give me that. And so it was sort of like why I was including class as a conversation to begin with, because there's a definite level of like, if you've been on the streets, you will sympathize with one political point of view. And if you've like only been in your manor and sipping your tea with your pinky up, like you will view things from another perspective politically. So, yeah.
I think that's really good. And actually that leads me to think like, so when I say you don't have to make the antagonism personal, I feel like leaving the level of personal antagonism you have is good, but you don't need to make it into McTwisty mustache evil laugh again.
Yeah, my pitch is like Robert is sort of like confused by why Sydney is acting so nice, because he's like, you've always been a complete dick to me before. Like, you know, why are you suddenly like being all chummy? And it's because he's like trying to be sneaky and, you know, trying not to be discovered as like a overthrower.
Well, I like that pitch. I think that probably Robert would need an alternate explanation for that so that he doesn't get immediately suspicious. So there are lots of alternate explanations, though.
Yeah,
So,
like, I'm the captain. He wants to kiss up to me, you know?
yeah,
Stuff like
especially if there's something at stake that he knows, like, oh, he's just trying to whatever thing it is. Like if there's some sort of promise of reward and he gets to decide how to split it up, or whatever the case is, or if he knows that, or if Sydney tells him that his performance on this mission will make him be considered for a position later on, and so it's like, oh, well, obviously.
Yeah, right.
Something like that, where it's like, especially, it could be interesting if Robert, like, asks him why he's being so nice, and then he has to come up with some sort of reason, and he's like, oh, man, like... but, like, something plausible that the readers would be like, oh, like, now this makes sense, and I don't have to think about this anymore. But
I was trying not to be weird, and that was even weirder.
That's like, yes, very relatable. And maybe that would be an interesting dynamic instead of, I feel like I liked the setting of their let's be friends again with the mutiny songs and like the ominousness of it. But I feel like that conversation, if it was something different where you were like, where it was something that you're like, oh, like this makes sense. Now I will go on my merry reading way and not pay any more attention to their relationship.
Until it explodes. And you're like, surprised. I'm surprised so much.
Especially if there are things like that we end up liking about Sydney. And that brings me to what I was going to say, which wasn't like a solution to this. It was more I feel like I like the idea of Sydney standing for a different political stance. I just feel like you didn't introduce the crown and like what they were doing until there was suddenly a spy for the crown. And I was like, what the heck? Like the royalty of this country is not on board with what the admiral's plans are. And that can very easily be introduced somehow early on, but to make that a key world building element early on, and then it makes it a lot more clear when some people side with one side or the other. What the stakes are for the political powers will also influence what the stakes are for the individual people who are aligned with those political powers. So that could be great. I feel like I really like the idea of knowing what Sydney stands to gain politically from this and why he is in favor of that. Yeah.
I love like criticism because like I just think of like solutions to the problems, you know. That's exciting to me. So like I'm thinking like, oh, what if the spaceship, instead of hovering over like the Queen's palace, they hover over like Parliament? And she's like, oh, they have all the power and the aliens know it, and so so and like Sydney reacting to that, like, oh, those idiots, I hate them. So I love this.
Yeah, and it might be a little bit hard to figure out how to work that in early enough on, because I feel like it should be in the first few chapters that we get there. But even something with the Admiral communicating a disdain for the royal family in some way, and you can use that to mention that tension that exists. It's a perfectly logical tension, so I think it's not going to be hard to explain. It's just fundamental to the rest of the things that are going on. Okay, so last big thing, because I don't have any, like, at the end of the story, you're like, I don't know about this ending. And I was like, I don't know either, because I feel like it depends on some of the choices that you make elsewhere. So this isn't really in relation to the ending. It might just influence your ending. But, so Robert's your main character. You're dealing with the theme of power, and you have three main captains who he's had before this. First Oliver, and then Dawn, and then Beale. There are big reveals about all three of them. I had a hard time keeping them straight because they're only briefly mentioned, and I feel like that took away some of the impact, and I cared about some of the reveals more than I did others because of the way you set them up and how tied they were to Robert as a person. So I will give my thoughts on this. You can go in whatever way you think, but in thinking about what you feel like you want to do with the story, there are some that I think will be easier than others to explore more. So if you're broadening the story and making this a lot longer, I think you could probably include all of these subplots. and make them all meaningful to the reader. I think if it's going to stay this length or only a little bit longer, that you're probably going to have to chop one of them, because I think otherwise it's going to be hard for the reader to keep track of and care about all of the things that went on in Robert's past. So here's why I have hesitancies about Beale as an abuser storyline, or not Beale as an abuser, sorry, Oliver as an abuser storyline. I think you can definitely go with it and make the whole story, make the power as a theme focus on that, but it would require the most changes to what you're doing currently, I feel like, because first of all, I think if you're writing a book to explore the complexities of child abuse and its effects on people, that can be really well done. If you're using it as a plot twist at the end and it's not really inherent in the character until that point because you're trying to hide it from the reader, I don't know that it does as much justice to child abuse as an issue, and knowing that it would be triggering for a lot of readers, I think you can definitely do it, but it has to be like one of the main themes as opposed to something that's in there.
As something that's like, and it's tough because I did try to forecast a little bit, and like the level of you're right. I mean, that's the thing, is it does feel cheap because, you know, this is a short book with a short amount of space to deal with, you know, something that heavy and weighty. And, you know, same thing with Beale. Like, two of his sort of commanding officers turn out to be like total monsters. And that's as a third act reveal, you're right, it does get crowded, and it doesn't necessarily do diligence to, you know, what's obviously like a very heavy and terrible thing.
And I think the way you could do that, if you thought, you know, I really feel like, as you think through a plot, that the Oliver is a child abuser one is the one to go with, I think in that case you'd need to say, okay, knowing that this is what happened to Robert in his youth, how does that affect his view of power from the start? Because at one point in the end, he's talking to Dawn, and Dawn is like, we are protecting these children, like, it's like, don't you dare think about killing them for what their parents did. And Robert's like, I don't know, man, like, maybe we should kill the children. And then he's like, wait, like, I of all people, like, that's the same time you revealed the child abuse thing. Whereas if that actually happened to him, either he would be so callous that he himself doesn't care about human life, even the most vulnerable human life, or he would be especially protective of the vulnerable. And he seems like he's kind of walking in between, which I think is fine, except for that experience that he had. Whereas if he didn't have that experience, I think it would be pretty easy to make the power dynamics more about class struggle and like, well, it just happens, like it's life on the streets. But because of that very personal experience he had as a child, to think of him like considering killing the kids doesn't seem as realistic for his character.
Yeah, and that's tough because I don't know that I was like trying to get across that. And again, you don't have a lot of time to like flesh these things out. But like I'd never pictured him like even considering like murdering children. You know, that was not at least what was in my heart when I wrote it. You know, at the same time, I think he is aware that like, you know, and it's also difficult because like writing a book from the point of view of someone, you know, necessarily they're going to have shadows, and necessarily they're going to have like things that they don't see or understand about themselves. And at the same time, you need the reader to understand that, to see why they're doing what they're doing, even if they don't really know. So as a challenge, and that's what it's about.
Yeah. And again, I feel like if you decided to keep that, you could go through it and say, what changes would I need to make knowing that this is part of this person's past? And also, how can I distinguish, like, how can I order for people? Like, okay, he was under this captain, then this captain, then this captain, and now it's present day. And make sure that we know who all of them are enough for this reveal to be impactful. Because various soldiers did mention the names of these people throughout, including the admiral in the very first scene. But not often and not with any characterization. And there were no specific flashbacks or stories told about them where we could distinguish them in our minds. The other reason I feel like the Beale storyline might be slightly better, although I would say like maybe a few more hints about that would be good, because the Admiral mentions like he was killed in an alleyway and like that's a shame in the very first chapter when so many other things are going on that you're like,
Right.
don't know who that guy is, just trying to figure out what you're doing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then later it doesn't come up, like nobody's like, oh, you shouldn't go carouse in the streets on this island because remember what happened to Beale or something
Right.
like that, where you can remember like, oh yeah, like met a bad end, like that's unfortunate for that guy.
Yeah.
But the reason I like that one more is because it doesn't feel like it's just there to be a plot twist, because throughout you've made all of these hints about what happened to his parents, or like what he experienced. Like, you know, his mom was killed, but you don't know by whom. And, you know, his dad turned him out, and you learn progressively more. And so I felt really invested in like, oh, like what's the story behind that? And I had no idea that it was that he killed
Right.
Beale. And I really liked the way that reveal played out too, with him talking to the kids and revealing that to the reader, but not to the kids. Like that was just really good.
Cool. Yeah.
And so for that reason, I tend to prefer that one, but I think the other one can work. It's just that it's heavy, and that's going to be a lot of work to unpack in a good way. So you can do it. I
Totally.
believe in you, but it would have to be pretty tough to do that. I think also because most of that reveal was done in a scene where Don was supposedly drunk, and also like it was hard to the reveal
Figure out
itself.
what he was trying to say.
Yeah, because in that scene, you were both trying to reveal what his plan was going to be, and also his past, and who Dawn is. And there was a lot going on that I felt like it didn't have the gravity that a reveal like that maybe should have. So that could be another thing to address if you decide to keep that plot twist. So
Totally. I think that's actually a really good point for anyone listening. Like, you know, you introduce a mystery that like needs to be solved by your reader, you know, like, oh, there's a mom murder. Like this can't just be here for no reason. Like, you know, he specifically like remembers certain things about it. And like, it's obviously like important driving force in his life. Like, I'm going to tuck that back in my mind. And then when, you know, reveals are made, then, you know, it will be satisfying. The same thing was not like done for Oliver. And, you know, there's definitely like, you know, the character sort of cringes whenever he hears about this guy and, you know, does not seem to hold him in the same high esteem as everyone else. But like, it's not a sort of like, it's not in the back of the reader's mind like, oh, I need to find out what happened to this guy when he was like the cabin boy or whatever. Like that was never something that people were like trying to figure out. So yeah, I think it's a really good point for like, if you're going to do reveals, it should be something that like your reader is like really wanting to know, even if they don't know that they want to know it. So yeah.
And you know, I feel like another aspect to that is that this story is told entirely from Robert's point of view. And because Robert is hiding these secrets, and especially the one about Oliver, there's nothing that you could like, you can characterize Oliver more, like you can show that other people really like him, and then that will draw out more that Robert doesn't. But I think if you had a story where there were two different perspectives, this would be a lot easier to pull off in a satisfying way than just from Robert's point of view. You can still do it, but I think it would be, as I think about it, I think, oh, if this story was told partially from Don's point of view, or somebody maybe who held Oliver in high esteem or who knew about him over legends, there would be a lot more hinting that you could do without being in Robert's head, where it would feel like you're just cheating the reader if you don't reveal what he's thinking. So
yeah. And as you were saying, like at the start of the podcast, like maybe those people can be combined, you know, the Beale and Oliver character. And so, yeah, that's a, condensing so that you don't have like 15 different things going on and confusing everybody. Condensing characters is one way to do that.
Yeah, and they definitely, those things serve the theme. And so just thinking about like, how does this serve the theme? And also the fact that you have a lot of plot twists that are really good. And I think that you don't need to try to be like, okay, how can I cram in as many as I possibly can in this ending here? So if you end up losing one or having one that is a reveal earlier on or something like that, I think it will still have the impact of the plot, because I think that at the point that the readers are at where they're really invested in Robert, they're going to care about finding out about his past, and they're also going to care about the decision that he makes in the future. Yeah, so I feel like that just highlights a really good example of you have a lot of great things going on. It's just a matter of looking through the story and deciding what's going to best serve the plot and the theme, and especially the character. Since Robert is the main reason we're reading this story, what's going to be both contribute to us liking him as a character and being especially excited when he succeeds in his next few chapters of Daring Do, which I enjoyed. It was quite fun.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. I do want to point out to the listener that at no point did you bring up technology, or in the end, they end up talking to a whale briefly. And none of that is like really that important to a reader. Like, it can be like cool, like window dressing, but it's really about the characters and about like what they're about. And the conflict therein. So if you are a writer and you're worrying about like, oh, hey, I need to make the technology systems like totally flawless, like that's not really the point in this type of fiction.
Yep, that is definitely true. It's all about the characters and the plot, and can have some great world building stuff, and I feel like that definitely adds, but I'm never going to call you out because whatever gizmo shouldn't be able to do these two different things.
Yep.
That's fine.
Yep. Thank you so much, Amy. This was a pleasure. And I really look forward to messing around with this book a little bit. But man, it was such a pleasure having you on. And I feel like I just stole your professional critiquing abilities.
Never feel guilty. I feel like whenever you're reading and critiquing something, you know what to better look for in the things that you write as well. And so it's just a good exercise for everyone.
Yep. I will try to get some expertise so that I can donate it as well. So thanks again.
Oh, you have it.
I kid. Amy, thank you again. This was just a pleasure. And I appreciate you working through the technical difficulties and reading a whole dang book to do a podcast. It's really, really awesome. So thanks again, and you have a wonderful day.
Thanks.